Welcome to another deep dive. We're looking at a whole stack of recent articles straight from Kenyan news outlets. We've got a bit of everything: political maneuvering, economic updates, and even some international climate news. Think of this as like your express ticket to understanding what's happening in Kenya.
Yeah, we're not going to just summarize headlines, though. We'll be connecting the dots to
Oh.
see the bigger picture.
Okay, let's jump in. We have 6 articles focusing on political shakeups. We've got 5 on economic developments and challenges. Then we have 4 articles about accidents and crime, and 2 articles that are about international climate news. One headline that really stood out to me was Senator Umtata sets sights on presidency, sparks debate on campaign financing.
Oh, that's a good one. That kind of shows that we're in a period of transition,
Yeah.
not just because of the upcoming elections, but also with the alliances changing and all the potential power plays.
Yeah, so Senator Umtata,
Yeah.
he's known for those public interest lawsuits of his.
All right.
He's considering a presidential bid in 2027. But then Senator Chirargai immediately pointed out how expensive it is to win a presidential election in Kenya.
Yeah, that's true.
It makes you wonder if Umtata is serious about this or if he's just trying to make a statement.
That's a good question. It also points to a bigger problem in Kenya: campaign financing. Is it about getting support from voters or just having lots of money and political tricks? Whether Ontada actually runs for president or not, his announcement might force people to talk about this issue.
And while we're on the topic of political maneuvering, the government's in a tight spot financially after those infrastructure deals with India's Adani Group were canceled.
All right.
If I remember correctly, they were going to help with projects like fixing up the power grid and expanding the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport.
Exactly. The Adani Group's legal problems in the U.S. have really messed things up. Now the Kenyan government has to find other ways to pay for these really important projects.
This whole situation has stirred up a lot of political controversy, too. Wiper leader Kalonzo Musyoka is planning to sue the government over canceling the deals. He claims it's going to cost Kenya millions of dollars. What do you think his motivation is? Is he truly worried about the economic impact? Or is this a strategic move to position himself against the Ruto administration?
Hard to say for sure. Musyoka's move definitely complicates an already tense political scene, though.
Right.
It'll be interesting to see how this plays out in court and what it tells us about the relationship between Musyoka and the current administration.
And then there's former Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua.
Oh, yeah.
Last month, he became the first Kenyan deputy president to be impeached, which has definitely shaken things up.
Yeah.
He's been criticizing President Ruto publicly and hinting at forming a new political alliance. And he's even planning a big announcement for January. Do you think this potential alliance could actually threaten Ruto's power base?
It's hard to say for sure. Gachagua being impeached and what he's done since
Right.
has definitely made things uncertain. Whether he can get enough support and create a strong alliance remains to be seen.
Right.
But you can't ignore how outspoken he's been and how willing he is to directly challenge Ruto.
And then to make things even more interesting, there are rumors going around about a potential reconciliation between President Ruto and former President Uhuru Kenyatta.
Really?
Imagine if that happened. How do you think it would change the political landscape?
Wow. A Ruto-Kenyatta reconciliation would be huge. It could completely change all the political alliances. Imagine former enemies joining forces.
Yeah.
And people like Gachagua and Musyoka might be left out in the cold. It would be fascinating to see how it all plays out.
Right.
And what are the reasons behind it? Is it about political strategy, or do they really want stability? Or maybe they realize they have common goals.
It's like we're watching a high-stakes poker game, and
Exactly.
we're just waiting to see who wins.
Exactly. And the stakes in this game are really high. What happens could affect Kenya's stability, the economy, and even how society functions.
Okay, let's switch gears for a minute. Let's talk about President Ruto giving money to churches.
Oh, yeah.
It's been pretty controversial. Some critics say it goes against the idea of separating church and state. There have even been religious leaders who have refused to accept his donations.
Right.
What's your take on this? Is it a genuine expression of his faith, or is there something more calculated going on?
It's complicated. There are a lot of different angles to consider. Ruto says his donations are just a personal expression of his faith, but it definitely looks a little suspicious, especially considering the economic struggles a lot of Kenyans are facing.
Right.
It raises questions about the influence of money in religious institutions and whether it's blurring the lines between faith and politics.
And it's interesting how this issue of church donations ties into another theme we're seeing in these articles. The government trying to get people to sign up for the Social Health Authority.
The SHA.
Right, the SHA. It's their universal health care plan. They've had some issues trying to get it up and running. Now they're even targeting churches to try and boost registration.
It's a really interesting strategy, using religious institutions to promote a government program.
It shows just how important the SHA is to the government and how much trouble they're having getting people to participate.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder if there's a general distrust of government initiatives. Maybe that's why they're seeking support from trusted community institutions like churches.
That's a good point. The SHA's success might depend on more than just how it's designed and implemented.
Yeah.
They need to build public trust and address people's concerns and skepticism. It reminds us that just having a good policy isn't enough. There are other factors that determine whether it will succeed.
Okay, so we've talked about political maneuvering and these controversial donations and the challenges of implementing a big healthcare initiative. What else is on our Kenyan news agenda?
So we've been talking about all the political stuff and the financial challenges facing Kenya,
Yeah.
but we can't forget about how all this impacts people's everyday lives. One article talked about how the price of cooking oil has skyrocketed. Wow. There's a real issue that's hitting families hard.
Yeah, those daily expenses can make people feel the economic uncertainty even more.
Right.
What's the government doing to try and fix this?
Well, they've started an investigation into why the prices are going up.
Oh, okay.
So they're taking it seriously.
Yeah.
But is that enough?
Right. It makes you wonder, is an investigation enough, or do they need to do more to intervene directly?
Exactly.
It also makes me wonder about the bigger economic picture.
Yeah.
Is this inflation just limited to cooking oil, or are we seeing prices rising for everything?
Great.
And what's causing all this?
Those are all good questions.
Yeah.
And I think the answers probably involve a lot of different factors. Things like global supply chain problems, challenges with local production, and maybe even people hoarding supplies.
Right.
It shows that economic problems are usually all connected, and they're influenced by a lot of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of connected problems, there were also articles about the government trying to crack down on corruption.
Oh, right.
It seems like some people have been ordered to hand over assets that are suspected to be from criminal activity, like luxury cars and expensive properties.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Those asset seizures send a pretty clear message. The government is serious about fighting corruption.
Right.
But it does raise some questions about fairness and whether this could be abused.
Like what kinds of questions?
Well, are these seizures based on actual proof or just suspicion?
Okay, yeah.
And will this actually stop corruption?
Right.
Is it enough to just get the stolen assets back?
Right.
Or do we need to look at the root causes of corruption?
You're bringing up a really important point. To really deal with corruption, you need to do more than just one thing.
Right.
You need to strengthen institutions, promote transparency, and create a culture where people are held accountable. Let's go back to politics for a second. We talked about those rumors of a possible reconciliation between Ruto and Kenyatta.
Oh, yeah. Right.
What do you think would motivate them to do that, and how would it affect the existing political alliances?
Well, think about their motivations for a second. Do they genuinely want to unite the country and make it more stable?
Okay.
Or is this just a way to gain more power and push aside their rivals?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And how would a reconciliation like that impact people like Gachagua, who's doing his own thing, or Musyoka, who might end up being isolated?
It's hard to say what will happen, but it would definitely cause a major shift in alliances.
Yeah.
It's like the whole political landscape would be reshuffled.
Makes you wonder, is this a sign that they're being pragmatic, like they realize they need to work together to solve Kenya's problems?
Right.
Or is it just a power grab by the political elite?
It's probably a mix of both. And we might never know their true intentions. What's clear is that this potential reconciliation makes an already unpredictable political situation even more uncertain.
Let's shift gears a bit now. We can't forget about the issue of those unpaid pensions that are owed to retired government workers.
Oh, right.
This isn't a new problem. It's been going on for a while. It raises concerns about whether the government can handle its finances and keep its promises.
Yeah, it's worrying.
The fact that they've set up a committee to deal with this shows that they're taking it seriously.
Right.
But it also highlights how complicated this problem is.
This is not an easy fix.
From what I've read, it involves a mess of county government debts, problems with managing the pension funds, and maybe even some political games.
It's a good reminder that when finances are mismanaged and people aren't held accountable,
Right.
there are real consequences for real people.
Yeah, these unpaid pensions are broken promises.
Right.
They represent financial hardship for people who dedicated their lives to serving the country.
It's really sad.
And it makes you think about whether pension systems are sustainable in the long run,
Yeah.
not just in Kenya, but everywhere.
It's a global issue.
As people live longer and populations get older, governments all over the world are struggling to keep their pension systems afloat.
That's a tough challenge.
Okay, let's zoom out to the global stage for a moment.
Hmm.
Remember the AP29 climate conference?
Oh, yeah.
They reached an agreement there which was seen as a step forward, but it also got some criticism, especially from groups like Greenpeace Africa.
Right.
They called it climate colonialism.
What do they mean by that?
Well, they're saying that the deal doesn't do enough to hold wealthy nations accountable for their past emissions.
Right.
And they think it relies too much on carbon markets,
Okay.
which they see as a way for richer countries to offset their emissions without actually reducing them.
They're basically paying to pollute
Right.
so they can keep doing what they're doing.
Exactly. So it seems like there's a major disagreement about whether the solutions are fair and if they'll actually work. What does this mean for climate action? Will it make things harder to make progress?
Well, it definitely creates tension and distrust in the negotiations.
Yeah.
It shows just how difficult it is to find a global solution to the climate crisis that everyone thinks is fair and effective.
It reminds us that climate change isn't just an environmental problem. It's
Yeah.
connected to social justice, economic development, and international relations.
Absolutely.
It shows that we need to have more open and honest conversations.
Yeah.
We need more transparency and a real commitment from all countries to work together towards a sustainable future.
I agree.
So in this deep dive, we've talked about a lot.
Yeah.
Political intrigue, economic troubles, social problems, and global concerns.
Yeah, a lot.
What are some of the key things that stood out to you? So we've talked about the big picture in Kenya, but what about some of the more specific stories? What really stood out to you?
One that caught my eye was about KETRACO, the electricity transmission company.
Yeah.
They're having to find new ways to pay for fixing up the old power grid because that deal with the Adani Group fell apart.
So something happening on the other side of the world is impacting a big project in Kenya.
Yeah, it really shows how connected everything is.
It highlights how important it is to think ahead and have backup plans, especially when you're depending on investments from other countries.
Exactly. They're looking at getting funding from places within Kenya now, like insurance companies and pension funds. But that comes with its own set of challenges.
This whole situation with KETRACO reminds me of another infrastructure project we talked about. President Ruto's plan to get the Karinga Airport in Kericho County going again.
Oh, right.
It sounds like he had to step in personally to make sure they got the land for the project.
Land ownership is always a tricky issue in Kenya.
It's a good example of how sometimes you need strong leadership to get development projects moving. But it also makes you wonder about transparency and whether the land is being distributed fairly.
Yeah. Were the local communities considered in this process?
It's a reminder that development isn't just about big plans and economic numbers.
Right.
It's about people and their lives and making sure everyone benefits fairly.
Speaking of benefits being shared fairly, the government's been trying to get everyone signed up for the Social Health Authority.
The SHA.
Right, the SHA. But they've run into some problems.
Oh, really? Like what?
It seems like people are having trouble adding their dependents and figuring out which hospitals they can go to.
It's like even when you have good intentions, putting policies into practice isn't always easy.
Definitely.
So what have we learned from how the SHA has been rolled out so far?
I think it shows how important planning is and clear communication
Right.
and keeping an eye on how things are going.
Yeah.
And maybe the most important thing is listening to feedback from the people who are actually affected by the program.
It reminds us that being in government isn't just about creating policies.
Right.
It's about dealing with unexpected problems, adapting to challenges. Right.
And making sure policies actually help the people they're supposed to help.
Right.
Which brings us back to politics, where things could change drastically.
Those rumors about a potential Ruto-Kenyatta reconciliation are really interesting.
Yeah, imagine if they actually teamed up.
Could have changed the whole political game.
Think about what could happen.
Yeah.
More stability, policies that get implemented more smoothly,
Right.
and a united front on important issues.
It could also mean that power becomes more concentrated.
Yeah.
And people who disagree might be pushed aside.
And what about people like Gachagua, who's doing his own thing,
Right.
and Musyoka, who might end up being isolated? It's a situation full of intrigue and uncertainty.
Definitely.
It feels like Kenya is at a turning point,
Yeah.
facing a mix of challenges and opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
internal tensions, and external pressures.
Mm-hmm.
This deep dive has given us a glimpse into just how complicated things are right now.
It's been really fascinating, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
We've seen how events that seem completely separate.
Like a legal case in the U.S.,
Yeah.
a climate conference in Dubai, a bus accident in Nairobi are
Yeah.
all actually connected. They all contribute to the complex story of Kenya today.
As we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a question to think about. As Kenya goes through this time of change and uncertainty, what role will its citizens play in shaping the country's future? Will they embrace the chances for progress and change,
Right?
or will they be held back by division and stagnation?
Those are important questions.
The answers aren't found in headlines or political speeches.
Right.
They're in the hearts and minds of the Kenyan people.
It's up to them to decide.
Until next time, stay curious.
Bye.